Good morning. So my name is John McNamara. I've been involved with DPDK for about 5 years. I work at Intel. Originally a developer. Now I work managing a development team. I'm also the maintainer of the documentation in DPDK. I review all the patches that go up onto DPDK, and I still occasionally submit patches as well. So today we're going to look at the DPDK Community Survey. This is a survey that this is the second year we've run it. We presented the results from last year's one at the summit last year here in the US. So we circulated this survey between September and October of this year, mainly via the mailing list. So a lot of the kind of respondents we got, I guess, would be, and we'll see this from the kind of demographics, the breakdown of who responded, would have been developers. We kind of highlighted it a lot at the conference in Dublin as well, and encouraged people to get on there and, just make your opinion felt. So we'll look through some of the findings from this. It was mainly broken down, the survey, into about 32 questions in these kind of 4 categories, mainly around usage, but also kind of around the roadmap and what features people wanted, around the whole kind of the ecosystem of submitting patches, and also around documentation. There was 190 people responded. That was up from about 150 last year. And 80% of those identified themselves as a developer or a software engineer, something in that category. And we'll see that in a minute. But that's something just to keep in mind because it kind of influences the results a little bit. So before we look at this year's, we'll just have a look back to last year. So these were the 4 items that were on the end of the presentation last year in terms of areas that were highlighted by people who as areas that they wanted some focus on within DPDK. And the first one of these, release support, in terms of having a stable release, and Jim mentioned the LTS release as well. They're now in place. They seem to be functioning. The open source vendors are consuming them downstream. We're getting reasonably good feedback on them. So we have the LTS, which is 16.11, is the current LTS. That'll go on for another year, 2-year cycle. We'll have another one from 17.11 will be LTS as well. And we also have stable releases where we backport patches for one release cycle. Documentation, there was, and again this year it came up, people requesting improvements. We made some. There's always scope for more. Performance as well. That's kind of a hard one. You can't really say, yeah, we closed performance, all the performance loopholes. But there was a lot of performance issues tied up this year, especially around vhost and Virt.io. I think we're seeing good performance improvements there. The need for continuous integration in a test environment, this came up quite strongly last year, especially in the kind of panel discussions. I think we get overall a plus mark for that, since we do now have kind of the initial phases of this in place. Anybody who is submitting up patches will probably see, kind of an automated email to that comes back and tells you if your compilation fixed on some OS that you didn't have, or some compiler you didn't have. And this shown in patchwork as well. There's a little tested column. Hopefully we'll have more of that. We have the performance lab that Jim was talking about there. So okay, so that's from last year. So we take these on board, and by the end of this as well, we'll see what the takeaways from this is and what we can do for the next year. Okay, so just before we get into the raw data, the people who are looking, who responded here. So the majority of people responded as some sort of software engineer. Now, the more mathematically inclined of you here will notice straight away that these things add up to more than 100%. That's because some of these are multiple choice questions, so you could be in one or two categories. So it comes over. If it looks like it's 100%, then it wasn't a multiple choice question. So we see kind of a range of people, but I think we see sales and validation engineers, and the interesting thing about this, I think, will be to look at the data year on year. I think to see some sort of maturity, you'd want to see things like validation and sales and marketing kind of increasing over time to indicate a stable kind of a maturing product. The others here, the categories were people who identified as consultants, researchers, academics, R&Ds, CTOs. Okay, and this question again was within those previous categories. What industry do you work in, or what kind of segment do you work in? And we see things like ISVs or OEMs quite a lot. Cloud service providers, which is interesting. Professional services, I guess people are working on a kind of contract basis into other companies. Again, that's something, if your product is maturing, you want to see that maybe increasing more and more, you see DPDK providing more and more professional services, more opportunities for people to come and work in. Academia, also very important that, we kind of stay within the focus of research initiatives. System integrators, I think quite important. The other category here had things like, so I guess this kind of maybe in terms of the question wasn't quite specific enough because a lot of people identified themselves as semiconductor companies, silicon companies, network, NIC vendors such as that, and quite a few mentioning that they were actually involved in the telecom sectors. So the first section of the survey was on usage. So what types of applications are you building with DPDK? Network applications, I guess that's kind of a general category for most things, but we see a lot of things like SD-WAN, customer premises equipment CPE, both physical and virtualized VCPE, radio access LAN, CRAN, RAN, and Flex RAN. So quite a wide range. In the other category there, we had, again, this is one of the things that would have benefited from being maybe a multiple choice question because people cover a lot of these areas, but Open vSwitch, quite a lot of respondents use the other category to mention Open vSwitch, but also other switch kind of software as well. Core network traffic generation actually was mentioned quite a bit, and things like BRAS, financial trading. Okay, so what other open source projects? And as I said, in the previous one, we saw a lot of references to OVS. We saw it here as well. OpenStack, Fido, Lagopus, which I think we'll be having a talk on tomorrow. BESS, which is the Berkeley Enhanced Soft Switch, I think. OPNFV. SPDK is a storage initiative, and the others here were things like, again, Click, Hyperscan, various in-house projects. OVS plus others, as I said, this one could have benefited from being a multiple choice. Warp 17, which is a TCP traffic generator based on DPDK. Quite interesting, worth looking at. Okay, so what versions of DPDK do you use? So the darker green here is this year's results, and the lighter green was from last year, from 2016. So what we see kind of here is that there's kind of a long tail back to like 1.8, which would be back like 2015 kind of releases. But the majority of people last year and this year are kind of towards the latest releases. Like the majority of people there are from 16.11 onwards, so about the releases that came out in the last year. 16.11, we didn't ask the question specifically here if you were using the LTS or not. That was in a separate question, but we can see that there's, that's kind of a strong spike there. And again, it'll be good to see this over time. It'll also be good to kind of to see if the LTS is kind of winning people off of those 1.8, 2.0, which can be kind of a bit of a pain for people to support. In terms of the long-term support release of 16.11. Do people plan to use it? No. So again, bear in mind that a lot of the respondents would be developers. Again, they're using the bleeding edge versions or the latest versions. We saw that in the previous slide. So they're not specifically interested in an LTS version. But there are, approximately just slightly less than half the people who responded were interested. So they're either interested in using 16.11 and continuing to use 16.11, or they're interested in a newer LTS around 17.11. Okay, do you use DPDK with virtualization or containers? About a third said yes, virtualization. Containers, small, but it could be caught up in the both category there. We'll have a panel discussion later on around containers and what we can do within DPDK to make it maybe, broaden out that segment a bit more for next year. On a related question of do you use DPDK with SRIOV or VirtIO vhost, we see yes, kind of a steady segment using SRIOV, which I think would have been typical of other years. But VirtIO and vhost I think is getting more and more usage. We're seeing both there. So that's interesting. And VirtIO vhost actually comes up in a lot of categories and was mentioned in a lot of places. Okay, what parts of DPDK do you currently use? So PMDs and the EAL I think are kind of hard to avoid if you're using DPDK at all. But again, Virtualization vhost was up like 6% from last year. Crypto dev was kind of new last year, so it's good to see that there's above about a 20% usage of that. QoS, I think, in terms of the kind of applications that we're seeing people using in terms of these BRAS1, I think things like QoS are becoming a bit more in flavor. Packet framework has steady support over the years. We've seen this. Classification, so all of our hash LPM, ACL, we have a new data structure this year, the membership library, which I think we'll be discussing tomorrow. KNI is generally popular. There'll be a talk on it later on as well. Packet distribution and load balancing. Okay, so an event dev is new, that's why it's on its own. Multiprocess isn't new, but we didn't ask that question last year, so strong support there. So these are the key areas, and this is worth bearing in mind, I think. Which PMDs are people using? So these are just kind of rated from top left down to the bottom, kind of interested in terms of which people chose, and this was a multiple choice one, so you can people could choose. So we see kind of the stalwarts there of the 10 gig, 40 gig on Intel, but we're seeing a lot of Mellanox in the top there, the VMX one. There's also what's quite interesting here is there's a lot of the kind of virtualized pole mode drivers. So we see PCAP, Ring, KNI, TAP, AF packet just in the top 10 there. So people kind of using these. And then kind of down to, some of these are new for the last year, so you wouldn't expect the uptake to be quite as much. But we're seeing a lot, we're seeing people using the kind of the crypto dev ones and the various encryption options there. So what are the most common operating systems? We kind of try to group these in terms of the main ones: Fedora, Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, SUSE. And again, we see kind of a trend of people using the latest versions in most cases. Maybe the outlier there would be Ubuntu, where 16.04 is their LTS, and which people tend to stick with. I think 18.04 will be coming out in the next year, and as far as I know, that's going to use DPDK's 17.11 long-term stable as well, so that'll be really good. I know that Red Hat as well are quite interested in the LTS, and Debian are consuming them as well, so that's been positive. Hard to get all of the different variants on here, and I think we could have had a few more of CentOS maybe in there. But anyway, it gives us a flavor of what people are using. Okay, so just a summary of that section, the uses section, which was kind of the biggest section of the survey. The main respondents were mainly developers, so that kind of skews the results a little bit in terms of, it's kind of a developer-centric view. People do tend to stay up to date with the latest versions. We did see that, kind of long tail going back to the older releases, but it's small and hopefully will diminish over time. The LTS is popular, like in a lot of the comments. It doesn't always show up in the data, but a lot of the comments people said, we're currently consuming 16.11, looking forward to 17.11 being an LTS as well. The other thing we're seeing is that it's been used in a lot more applications. In previous years we might have seen DPDK used in typical forwarding type of applications, but now we're seeing more kind of network function type of applications that are coming to the fore. As we saw, CPE, VCPE, RAN, the various difference of radio access, and Virtualization vhosts is quite popular. We saw that a lot just in the raw data, but also in the comments as we went along as well. Okay, so another section was on the features of DPDK. What parts of DPDK do you feel that needs to be improved the most? And this was one of the things that came out of last year, where one of the things that people wanted was an LTS and documentation. So the largest one here is debugging. And it's probably something as a community, so we could look at this list as a community and think, we should target some of these in the next year. So there is issues around debuggability. It can be hard. It's certainly not straightforward. So maybe something we can address. Documentation, it can always be improved. We'll see some results later on in a section on documentation where people feel that the documentation is actually quite good, but it can always be improved. The documentation, like the code, is all based on user input. So, you know, we can improve it ourselves as we go along. Performance labs, the lab, which Jim had up on the slide, that should be coming on stream in the next couple of months. And I think a lot of interest around that. Usability of the APIs, hardware support, continuous integration. This came up in a few places as well and from last year. The build system, which Bruce Richardson will be maybe addressing in his talk after this. And these are the categories. These are what people feel are the most important things for them that need to be improved. Okay, patch submission and support tools. Okay, so are there aspects of submitting a patch which could be improved? 2/3 said no, we love it, it's great. And 1/3 said, yes, there are aspects that could be. So by and large, the community is happy with what we have. But 1/3 of the people said, in particular, anybody who said yes, that they felt there was parts that could be improved, the majority of those said they'd like something like GitHub. A few people mentioned Gerrit, that they felt that Gerrit would be improvement. And people said something around the review time as well, the amount of time it takes for something to get something. Was a question or no? Okay. So we have that review time that was on the previous one. Let's go back. Yeah, improve review time. Well, that needs people to do the reviews, right? So we asked the question: do you actually just send patches or do you reviews? And it's about a 50-50 split where people said that they send more patches than the review or they review more patches than they send. But so that's the data, that's what people say, but I don't know, that somehow feels wrong to me, that I feel that we see less reviews than patches going up there. And that's something we as a community we really need to improve upon. Jim showed the slide where this was the biggest release, but 2 releases ago that had been the biggest release. Within the release before that had been the biggest release. It's not going to grow forever, but it is quite large. The amount of patches come in, and that's going to take kind of collective effort from the community to kind of address these, do some more work. So, which components do you contribute to most? Net, obviously, I guess that's kind of the bread and butter of what keeps people going. Again, Vert.io, vhost. A lot of mentions. CryptoDev. We've seen a lot of patches in the last year around the whole cryptography part of DPDK. Examples: QoS, traffic management. I think this one wasn't a multiple choice question, which is unfortunate because right down the end, which components do you contribute most? Docs. So people want docs to be improved, but they're not contributing them, for instance, there. But we're seeing some of the new stuff like event dev coming up there as well. How important is having a continuous integration in testing environment? So this is weighted very heavily towards yes, we want this, it's very important to us, okay? At least people are neutral on it, but the majority of people think that this is important or very important. So we have the basis of it there, we have the infrastructure there, but it really needs to be improved, expanded out. And it's one of the things that will help us, I think, scale, is to get as much of the tests and the checking that we do automated and get them done either at a patch or a patch set level. Okay, and a summary of that. So most people were happy enough with the kernel style of development. I think we see a lot of cross-use within the kernel, within OVS, and they have similar models, so people are happy enough there. But of those who didn't like that model, they would prefer to use GitHub, and a continuous test environment is very important to people. Okay, so documentation. How do you rate the quality of the documentation? So above average, good, yeah. So I think, if you look around at other open source projects, it is above average. It could be improved, especially around the areas, we'll look at that in the next slide, which asks which part of the documentation do you use. So programmer's guide, yeah, I guess that most people use that as a reference to user guides. The API documentation, these are the type of things we use on a day-to-day basis. The sample act guides are good, I think. We've been trying to improve them a little bit and kind of make them more cohesive, so it kind of looks more like a kind of how-to. We also have how-to guides now. they're increasing. The NIC guides, I think, are quite good. Thomas put some work into this to kind of get people to write up NIC-specific areas within the NIC guides, and that's kind of working out okay. In which format would you like information about features in DPDK? So white papers, people say they like those. Hands-on tutorials, and we have some of those up on the Intel Developer Zone. Sujata is here someplace. Sujata and MJ as well. If you talk to them about, they'll talk to you about the online tutorials we have and other stuff. Summits, yeah, I guess people that consume the video here. Short videos, yeah, that'd be good. We should do more of those. Webinars is maybe something we could do. We get a lot of interaction at these type of summits, but it would be kind of good to do those in between the summits, maybe on kind of, a monthly call if we had information or people wanted to have, RFCs that they wanted to discuss and maybe make a discussion. So that's something we could look into. Okay, so that takes me towards the end. The overall summary, we had 190 participants, which was good. The more kind of feedback we get, the more we can kind of rely on this information. I didn't put up a slide, but 95% of the people said that DPDK was meeting their business requirements, which is good. Although if DPDK wasn't meeting your requirements, then maybe you probably wouldn't be on there filling in a survey, but maybe you would. There was quite a wide range of use cases. I think we saw that more this year than previous years. And I think it's kind of not just an indication of where DPDK is maturing to, but also where the market is maturing to as well. We're seeing a lot of kind of network function type applications. I think we'll see more of that in the future. A continuous test environment is very important to people. As I said, we've made the first steps there. We need to make that better. And finally, just kind of a thank you to everybody who did take the time to fill this in and give us useful information. So, questions? Okay. In that case, I'll hand over. Thank you.